Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. So we're going to get started and hope everyone gets a lot out of the time that we have here. Okay. Well, thank you for joining today's webinar on helping newcomer clients find housing, which will include a live Q&A with our Refugee Housing Solutions team. This training is presented to you by Switchboard in partnership with Refugee Housing Solutions at CWS. Switchboard is a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States, and Refugee Housing Solutions provides housing technical expertise as part of Church World Service to support all national resettlement agencies support access to safe, affordable housing during the resettlement process. Here's a quick overview of your settings in Zoom. This is a Zoom webinar, so you're joining on listen-only mode. You may switch your audio between your computer and phone at any time under audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. Due to the large number of people on today's webinar, we've disabled the chat box. However, you do have the option to send messages to the speakers and co-facilitators via the Q&A, which I'll talk about later. Keep an eye on the chat for messages from Switchboard and links to various resources we'll be mentioning throughout today's webinar. Lastly, I'd like to mention that today's session will run for approximately 60 minutes and is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the recording, slides, and recommended resources within 24 hours. The webinar transcript, along with the recording, will also be posted on the Switchboard website within the following days. Okay, so today's speakers. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. Firstly, my name is Joshua Weber. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. I'm the Associate Director at Refugee Housing Solutions, which is part of Church World Services. Also, my two colleagues are here today. They're part of CWS. One is Lynette Pearl, the Senior Housing Programs Associate, and the other is Evie Long, the National Housing Coordinator at Church World Service. I'll give them a chance to briefly introduce themselves when we get to the Q&A section a little bit later in the webinar. Okay, so the learning objectives. So this is really why we're here today. By the end of this session, we're hopeful that you'll be able to identify at least one promising practice or useful resource related to short-term or long-term housing solutions for refugees and other newcomers. And specifically, the most important thing is that you have a practical way forward if you're facing a challenge, and hopefully we can be a resource to provide that. Okay. So during this webinar, a little bit later, we're going to have a chance to have a live Q&A session with the two people that I introduced. The participants will have the opportunity, you will have the opportunity to ask questions and engage directly with those who are on the call today. Before then, I'm going to walk through a couple of slides that really kind of set the stage and context for what we're going to discuss in a little bit later. But most of the time will be set aside for the Q&A. And also, if you'll notice, you can insert in the Q&A, in the Q&A box, you can submit questions. And then later on in the webinar, we're going to have a chance to address those questions. Okay. So first, we'd like you to participate in a Zoom poll, very quick Zoom poll. And the question that we're going to pose to you is, what challenges have you experienced specifically in housing newcomers? So we'll give you a minute. Okay, I can see a lot of people are already filling it out. That's excellent. Okay. Okay, great. All right, almost everybody's completed it. That was great. Very quick response. That's great. The number one issue or challenge being faced, seeing in the is rising rent prices followed by insufficient housing stock and availability. So unfortunately, that's not a surprise. This is something that we often see in our work, and we're going to discuss that in a little bit. So it's good to see that the content we have organized is very much in line with what you're seeing in your work. Okay. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to kind of set the stage. We're going to talk a little bit about the context. Some of you are going to be very familiar with this information. Just 3 or 4 slides. I'm just going to read through quickly, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. The number one reason why we're here is why specifically we're talking about newcomer populations. There are extra barriers. There are different kinds of barriers to accessing housing that these communities face. They are new to the U.S. and dependent mostly on resettlement agencies after arrival. And often, if not normally, they have a lack of knowledge of U.S. housing systems. So it's very challenging for them to navigate. There are extra barriers to accessing housing. Different kinds of background checks. No social security number upon arrival. There's a lack of credit history, lack of employment history, and lack of previous housing history and high security deposits. And these extra barriers can become very preventative as refugees and newcomers try to access housing. In a kind of a building on that, dependent on resettlement agencies upon arrival. Newcomers may quickly become self-sufficient, but they need assistance upon arrival to facilitate that refugee resettlement process. These areas that they need support, most importantly, finding permanent housing, enrolling children in school, and applying for jobs, and all of the other activities that you'd expect during the refugee resettlement process that newcomers face as challenges, housing just being one of them. Okay. When we talk of lack of knowledge of U.S. housing systems, the U.S. housing market is difficult to navigate for people who have been here their entire lives. So as a newcomer or refugee, this lack of knowledge in the U.S. housing system can become a very significant barrier to finding long-term affordable housing. So identifying housing, good quality housing, so safe, healthy places to live. It's difficult, and even if you're, like I said, born and raised in the U.S., newcomers are learning a new system and may not know how to search for, find, and apply for rentals. So just those basic things that you need to access housing can sometimes be very difficult. Okay, great. I'm gonna ask a second question. Okay, so how do newcomers pay for housing upon arrival? Okay, so this is our second of 2. So this is the last polling question, but we're just trying to gain as much information from you all as to what brought you here. Okay, great. Okay, we're over half responded, which is excellent, 70%. And we're seeing how do newcomers pay for housing upon arrival? The 89% of respondents so far have said financial assistance from resettlement agencies. Okay, good. That makes sense and is very much in line with what we'd expect. Okay, great. So that was the second of 2 Zoom polls, but we appreciate the input. Okay, great. So financial assistance available to newcomers. We're going to just speak very briefly on this. Some of you are, I'm sure, very familiar, but just while we have everyone on the webinar, we'd like to just really detail, because sometimes these acronyms are thrown around, and we're just going to kind of set the stage so everybody's on the same page. But a myriad of programs and financial assistance are available to families served by resettlement offices. Some programs that most offices have for supporting clients are Reception and Placement, or RMP. This is a program in the United States Refugee Admissions Program and is funded by the Bureau of Populations, Refugees, and Migrations, or PRM. It is a 90-day program intended to support newcomers with adjustment at the beginning of their lives in the U.S. A second financial assistance available to newcomers is the Preferred Communities, or PC program. This program is funded by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, within the Department of Health and Human Services, DHS. And the enrollment period varies for this program. Another program that you may be familiar with is the Matching Grant Program. This is a 6-month program funded by ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, within the Department of DHS. And then lastly, employment programs. There's a lot of different types of these, but all resettlement offices support newcomers in obtaining gainful employment. This may be through an internal program or a partnership with an external partner. Most newcomers are eligible for 5 years of job assistance. Okay, great. All right, so that's kind of the, like I said, setting the stage for today's Q&A. I'm gonna just kind of jump into the chat and see. Okay, so I would encourage everyone at this point, we've got a couple of questions ready to go, but I would really encourage everyone, if they're interested in having a question answered by the panel, to go in and to post that question, and people can thumbs up that question if they also agree that they'd like to see us respond to it. But if not, we can get started with the Q&A section of today's webinar, which we have now about 45 minutes to really get into this. So this will be a chance for us to really unpack some of these challenges. And also, just very briefly, before I introduce or let Lynette and Evie introduce themselves, is just that, you know, RHS and Switchboard, we have a great partnership in which we provide live virtual technical assistance and upcoming some possibly in-person technical assistance and trainings. But we've already been working with resettlement agencies across the country for the past almost a year. So we have noticed that there are patterns in the questions that we get asked and the challenges that resettlement agencies face as they go through the resettlement process, specifically in regard to housing and those challenges. So we do have a couple of questions ready to go, but we also want to be open to, you know, seeing maybe there's a challenge that's being faced that we're unaware of, or something that you can ask and maybe we don't know the answer to. Give us a chance to follow up, do some homework, and get back to you on that. So feel free to, you know, this is a frequently asked question, but it can also be a challenging question as well that's posed. So we can get started now, but so I'll just ask, I'll ask a question, and then Lynette or Evie can answer, and then if, you know, maybe I'll add something at the end. But for this first question, I'll ask both of them just give a very, very brief introduction to you know, who they are, and just to kind of set the stage for who's on the call. So we'll start very, very broad. One of the most frequently asked questions that we get in our technical assistance sessions are, what are some of the strategies in which refugees that want to, quote, shop around, or basically see additional housing options when they're being presented a very safe and affordable housing option by the resettlement agency? There's a lot of reasons behind this, but maybe that we can talk about some strategies to kind of mitigate that before it kind of creates challenges that are unnecessary or unexpected. And I could just open up to Lynette and Evie about, you know, do you have any strategies or thoughts around ways in which those who support refugees and newcomers and accessing housing can kind of, you know, work to communicate expectations on that kind of initial housing search and being shown different kinds of housing options?
Sure, I can take that. Just want to confirm that you can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Great. I'll take that one. I'll give a brief intro just so you guys get an idea of why I have any experience in doing this. So my name is Evie Long, and I'm the National Housing Coordinator for Church World Service, or CWS. I've worked in refugee resettlement for about 8 years now, plus a stint as an intern, and I have worked across programs. I was an employment specialist. I was a case manager for 4 years, and I headed up our resettlement program in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, welcoming newcomers. And during that time, headed up the housing portion of resettling said newcomers. So I understand what it's like to work on the ground and all of these really important questions on actually doing the work and finding housing for newcomers. So this has definitely been an issue we've seen over the past year or so, but it's always been an ongoing issue of client expectations for housing when they arrive, and a resettlement agency or refugee provider's capacity to be able to do that. So I think one of the really important things when working with new arrivals is helping set their expectations. So we know that refugee arrivals receive some kind of cultural orientation before they arrive, but it's not very extensive. Oftentimes it's a little behind what's actually happening in the US. I think we've definitely seen this over the past couple of years, where maybe what is taught in the orientation overseas may not reflect the current housing market in the United States, especially over the last year and a half. And so really setting up that expectation upon arrival for clients is really important. CWS has developed some guidance for our offices, and also some client acknowledgement forms to just help explain to clients. Basically, you're giving them a mini overview of what it is to rent in the United States. So it's very helpful for clients to understand as well, you know, that this isn't you don't want them to live in a nice place, or you don't want them to live in the place they want, but it's this is what is available to them for the next couple of months. And this is what your capacity is. So some offices or agencies may say, hey, we will show you up to 2 houses. After that, you know, if you reject those 2, then you may have to find housing on your own. So different agencies have different policies on that. I definitely recommend talking to whichever resettlement agency you're working with to see if they have a policy, if they'd be willing to work on one, because for a lot of clients, it's just setting up the expectation of this is what is possible, and then this is what isn't possible. I think within that is setting up expectations for clients, but also for their US tie or family members who are welcoming them, for welcoming groups who are working with them. Sometimes they also have different expectations. So helping everyone understand that as a resettlement agency, you're not a realtor. You don't have even access to all the same housing that someone who would be working, you know, as a realtor or a landlord does. And kind of setting up those expectations as to this is what is possible, this is what isn't possible. You may want to include that in an intake, but kind of that part of the housing orientation is recommended happens upon arrival. Like that happens at your intake within 5 business days, so that clients are really aware and they don't feel like, you know, they've been bamboozled or tricked, and admitting to them and recognizing, we know that you may have been told something different by other people who are here, and we're sorry that's not the case. We're also bummed about the housing situation in the US right now. You still want to, you know, understand and tell them you understand and empathize with the fact that they're very disappointed, and that's a valid disappointment that they have.
Okay, great. Yeah, great answer. Yeah, and those tough conversations sometimes are difficult to kind of deal with, you know, downstream, months or even years later, when sometimes those expectations haven't been communicated or established. So yeah, I agree with that. Okay, great. So we're off to a good start. The next, I've been checking the Q&A in the chat, and there's 2 that I've got that are kind of I'm starting to see a pattern, which is good. But there's one that I wanted to ask first to either Lynette or Evie, but what are some strategies in identifying housing options for families with large family sizes? So, you know, this is often the US housing market is, especially in rentals, is usually a 2 or 3 bedroom max. It's very difficult to find a 4 bedroom or bigger. And oftentimes refugee and newcomer families are sometimes very large, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. So what are some strategies that you would advise or that have worked for you in the past of identifying housing options for those large refugee and newcomer families?
I can take this one again. This is definitely an issue, and we're seeing a trend nationally that specifically single family homes are falling out of rental and are becoming owner occupied. So this is a really big issue, especially anything over over 3 bedrooms, but even 3 bedrooms have been hard to find. So we're definitely seeing this trend. There are a couple of options that I know that I've utilized and worked with offices on is looking at the family makeup. So if you have, a really large family, are there multiple or income earners? Are there adult children in the family that maybe could have their own rental? I know I can give you an example of working with a family of 14 once, but they had multiple adult children. And so we were able to actually find two homes within walking distance of one another. And so we had the adult children were living in a separate home, and mom and dad and the minors were in another house. And so we were able to separate them while still making sure they lived close enough together, and of course, providing orientation to the families on why we had to do that, et cetera. Just like with any setting expectations, letting families know, like, this is not to be your forever home. We always coach families, hey, just like your first job, you don't have to stay there forever. Minimum your 1-year lease. If you want to move to another place, you absolutely can. This is just where you have to be right now until you start gaining credit, et cetera. And then with large families, specifically with this housing market, we really recommend, again, within the 90 days, there's not tons to do, but you maybe put them in 2 different homes if you're able to, but really working with that family and with the community, even on really working towards home ownership. This has been successful. Again, I think about that family of 14, but I've also worked with other similarly large families to really make sure to refer those families and maybe go the extra mile to locate home ownership classes with them. When you have a lot of income earners, they may be able to buy a home sooner rather than later, because we know that with a family of that size, even when they're working, it still might be hard for them to find a rental, like we discussed. In some areas, it's not just about price, it's about availability, and there may just not be a 4-bedroom for rent available to them. And so looking at home ownership as a long-term option, and maybe something that they want to look into sooner than maybe some of your other new arrivals, is a really good idea. And that might mean investing in interpretation for them to be able to attend home ownership courses. So looking at what's available in your community, and if you don't have that available, see how you can make that happen in your community for those larger cases. So those are a couple of examples. And then again, a lot of times private landlords are the way to go when you have really big families, because they're a little less picky about occupancy levels, especially if there's a lot of children. So they're okay with you having bunk beds and having 3 kids in a room, as long as it's fire code safe. So really prioritizing maybe making those relationships with more private landlords instead of big property management companies that sometimes have to live by some stricter guidelines that are on a national level. So those are just a couple, I would say, pointers.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's great. And all of that are things that we've heard work from resettlement agencies. Just to expand on one thing that we've seen work is work to maybe get 2 adjacent units. It's not a permanent solution, but if you can find an apartment building with 2 that you can kind of put side by side, sometimes that's not optimal, but it's something we've seen work. And also, just as far as there are in most geographies, there's an affordable housing community or a lot of nonprofits that work with that affordable home ownership. So it's a long runway to get there, but often those organizations do have kind of wraparound services, credit counseling, and building credit history, things like that. So if that you've got a family of 14, like what was just being discussed, is to really kind of maybe move them into a place where they can get some of those housing support services for the longer term. But that's just something to add upon there. But yeah, great answer. Something that has come up in the Q&A is what are some communication strategies and when working with landlords? So this is something I would say is one of the number one things that we get in our TA calls is working with landlords. This is something that has kind of, I would say, started to become a serious issue. There's a lot of different reasons why there's landlord hesitancy in renting to refugees and newcomers. So there's a lot there, but maybe I could just open up and say, what are some strategies that people could use to support that communication with landlords, whether there's hesitancy or kind of just building kind of an understanding of what refugees and newcomers are, and just where do you start when you're getting landlords who are unwilling or feel as if they're unable to rent to refugees.
I can take that question, Joshua. My name is Lynette Pearl, and like Joshua mentioned, I'm the Senior Housing Program Associate with Refugee Housing Solutions. I have 18 years in affordable housing, ranging from being a director for Section 8, property management, and working for Habitat for Humanity. So some of the things you can do, first start out with some very good outreach materials, and your outreach materials shall break down the mission of your agencies, because a lot of landlords are willing to work with you if your agency that is legitimate and has been around a while. So make sure you talk about your mission and the services you provide. Outline the resettlement process and the services that your clients will be receiving and the support they will be receiving. Also outline why they're rent ready. Why would they make good tenants? If your agency does have some incentives, outline the incentives and the benefits of the partnership. Also, make sure you have a designated point person to manage their concerns and questions. I do know some agencies, it depends on your manpower. They have the case managers doing the outreach, the recruitment, the education, and they're still providing case management to the actual client. If you do have the manpower, I do highly recommend you just have a housing specialist or a landlord specialist. This person, their full-time job should be doing the recruitment, the education, and that contact person if that landlord has any issues. So I do know a lot of landlords are willing to come on board if they know they have a particular contact person or liaison to work with during the whole tenure process of your clients. Have an open house. Again, I'm used to working in my past. I worked with difficult populations, veterans. A lot of the landlords were hesitant, but we had an open house to give them information, to give them a feel of the mission of what we were doing. And also we had the permission of a client of a success story, because a lot of people want to be part of a success story. So when you have an open house, it could be virtual or in person, depending on what you feel is going to be a good capacity for your agency. Make sure you actually have that face to the mission, that success story, so they can see, okay, this does work. Actually have a landlord as well. The landlord you've been working with, you have a landlord you've been working with, let them be your best PR, because they can see it from the perspective as a landlord and they know the concerns. So if you have a landlord, use that landlord to do some of your outreach and to talk about those issues or concerns a future landlord might have. If you have a newsletter, you can have a newsletter, include them in the newsletter so they can see all the great things your organization is doing and how they can be part of that resettlement process. So those are a few things you can do to open those lines of communication, but also to convince a landlord that's on the fence about becoming part of this. Did I miss anything, Evie, by chance?
I don't think so. I would echo that open house, or even like a landlord forum where you have a trusted landlord come and kind of, like Lynette said, that success story and say, I rented to refugees. I'm a partner with this organization. This is why they're a great organization. There are some agencies have landlords they've worked with for a decade. That's a great track record. That's a lot of money that you've brought into their business. So those type of kind of advocates, asking a trusted landlord partner to kind of be a part of a forum or an open house is a really great idea.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, we talk so often about the challenges in working with landlords, and I have a couple other follow-up questions from the chat on that. But What we found is that when we find resettlement agencies that are very successful in resettling and navigating complex housing markets, oftentimes it's those decade-long or years-long relationships with landlords that are kind of always part of the equation. So, you know, building those relationships, but also maintaining those relationships, and kind of not just kind of the, you know, getting someone into a unit or a family into a unit, but kind of following them through that, and then kind of having that relationship where you can kind of support when things maybe need some additional. So yeah, that's great. So on that note, something that is definitely repeatedly coming up is, and it's around this landlord hesitancy. But I'm going to read a question along the lines of what we're discussing from the chat is, how can we overcome the housing requirements? And specifically, you know, rental requirements and documentation requirements. So background checks, past rental history, credit checks, high security deposits, you know, just everything that goes behind those challenges there's landlord hesitancy that sometimes is exactly what you just answered, Phil, you know, kind of building those relationships and communicating, but sometimes there's a paperwork or kind of requirements that make it difficult. So maybe what are some ways that we can work around those challenges?
This is a great question, and it has been, this is not a new question. This has been, you know, for forever an issue in refugee resettlement, and having people rent to our clients, because especially to have upon arrival. I think part of it is the language we use. We're not asking them to waive documentation requirements. We're asking them to accept substitute documents. I think that's really important, because they do need to know who's living in their homes. You know, this is their business, the same way, you know, you need to put a name down and a credit card when you stay at a hotel. They need to know, you know, it is a legal document that they're signing. So we're not asking them to waive documentation. We're asking them to accept equally viable forms of documentation, right? So the idea that we don't have a social security number, would they accept their alien number? We don't have I would say we don't have a form of ID that they are used to looking at. Would they accept a copy of their refugee travel document? You know, and a copy of their assurance. I've had offices provide a copy of the assurance, especially for those who are trying to secure the housing pre-arrival, to say, we know who these people are. They're assigned to our office. These are their names. This is the information about the client. And it is it's an official document. So we're asking them. So that's the first thing, is when I'm speaking with landlords, I'm saying, I'm not asking, I know that you need documentation. Will you accept these other forms of documentation? So instead of pay stubs, would you accept this promissory note letter, which details everything about the case, details what resources they have available, like Lynette said, details all of the different programs that they have access to, et cetera, et cetera. And then as far as like for credit checks, HUD even has a really good resource for landlords on waiving credit checks that they put together during the Afghan evacuation, but they also have a general one for all demographics. So it's a really helpful resource to point them to. And this is an ongoing thing. I know that's one of the things that we are definitely advocating for on the refugee and the refugee resettlement world, is to have maybe some more documentation and letters, even from HUD or PRM, that we could give to landlords. That's something that we're advocating for pretty strongly. So we're hopeful that, you know, that will be a resource that would be available. But I think that a lot of it is the conversation. You're not asking them to waive, you're asking them to accept other forms of documentation. Again, an A number, which refugees, you do have access to that before they arrive. Again, their assurance, that's another really good option to provide. So it's always tricky, but a lot of it is in the language. And then assuring them and actually following up on that they will have these documentations. Like, we're going to be applying for their social security at this time. Their employment authorization document, which would be another form of a photo ID, should arrive within 3 months. And we will follow up help the client follow up and make sure that you are provided with these documents as soon as they're available to them. So I think assuring them again of maybe the timeline of when they will receive these. And I know that's been hard with documentation delays, but I know a lot of offices are going ahead to Social Security ahead of time and have been able to secure them. So just kind of giving them a timeline and an assurance that you will make sure that they have those documents once they arrive. And reiterating, of course, their background checks that they have through the US government, how extensive those are. And a lot of times I like to explain to them, you need the Social Security number to run a background check. That would be like running a background check on a newborn baby because they don't exist in this country yet. So that's sometimes a very helpful way to explain it to people of like, running a background check wouldn't be helpful. That particular background check isn't helpful. The one the US government did is very, very helpful. And the one UNHCR did. Even if they had a Social Security number, it wouldn't be a helpful one because they, of course, they haven't ever lived here. They don't have any track record within the US. So sometimes that can be helpful to kind of give them an idea of why it wouldn't even be helpful if they had a Social Security number right now. Even if they came with one, it would be kind of a blank slate to begin with.
Can I chime in, Evie? Especially if you're working with larger property management companies. Unfortunately, there's a lot of turnover with property managers. So if you want to educate a larger property management company on changing their policies and procedures, set up a meeting with their regional. That is where the change happens when it comes to the application process, because a lot of property managers is so stringent, they're required to have certain information to enter into a system to make the decision during the application process for them. So you need to possibly, if you can, find out who the regional property manager is, educate them on the process and see if they can change things in their actual system to accept alternative documentation, because it still meets their criteria. But again, you have a property manager, they're going to be so stringent and say, well, I need this and this and this, because that's what they're required to collect. That's all they know to collect. But if they have a regional property manager, they can say, okay, here's my portfolio. I can change some policy and procedures. You guys can accept this alternative documentation during the application process.
Okay, great. Yeah, and along those lines, I'm glad that the HUD letter was mentioned. So what we can do is in the resource, the follow-up email, I'm very familiar with it. We were just discussing it with HUD this week, actually. And so the one thing I'll just make a note, I will put that in the resources when we follow up. It's a very Afghan Operation Allied Welcome specific letter that HUD provided. If you're working with Afghan refugees, definitely it would be a great resource. But the one thing I can say is that I do know that, and we're participating in this, we are working on getting a kind of amended, more broadened refugee and newcomer letter from HUD. Yeah, Evie?
Yeah, I would also add, they also have another, so they have their general FAQ that's kind of like a pair to that, which is their FAQ on fair housing issues regarding exceptions to credit check policies, occupancy limits, affirmative marketing, and language access, which has more all-inclusive language. So I know a lot of offices that in the meantime, while we wait for refugee language letters, have been utilizing that because it's kind of across the board. So I can share that. I actually have the link to it, so I can share it now, but we should also share it in the follow-up.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, great. That's excellent. And then just two quick questions that I saw in the chat that maybe we could just, while we're kind of on the subject. One is the question, can we get connected with landlords associations and develop partnership programs with those? Just a little bit of a preview, that is something we're actively working on, is building those relationships with landlords nationwide. We've done a lot of work in that space. As you can imagine, it's challenging, but we have actually created some partnerships. We will be sharing a lot of that information in a webinar with Switchboard it's in the works now. So the announcement hasn't been posted, but it is 100% something we're focused on to really set aside the time like this to address specifically building relationships with landlords. So much more to come on that. I just wanted to make that note. And then also a question that was in the chat was once the refugees have been here for a year or two, how do we help with home ownership? Because it did come up earlier. And is the route the same as any American or different? This is something very quickly I'll just maybe just weigh in, because I come from the affordable housing sector. That's my main area of expertise. And I can say that just anecdotally, I know personally that a lot of the affordable housing community, the nonprofit space across the country, are very, very open to working with refugees and newcomers. And that's just something that I would say in your local area, whether it's a Habitat for Humanity or different local, affordable housing nonprofit, there are very, very strong partnerships around the country with resettlement agencies and affordable housing organizations. So, and you're right. There is, when you say a year or two, that time that's needed to get into an affordable housing program sometimes is a year or two. But often that we've seen is that when you're communicating to refugees and newcomers, if they know that there is an opportunity for home ownership, even if it's 2 or 3 years away, that is something that can kind of bridge that gap and kind of create some context around those kind of years of being a renter or kind of building up their credit or their employment history. Is that sometimes it makes that interim period a little bit more manageable, knowing that there is a way for them to enter into that housing market as an owner. So I would say, yeah, definitely wherever you're at in the country, there's an affordable housing nonprofit network. I'm 100% sure. There's a lot of different affiliates for different kinds of organizations, but this is what they do. So I would really encourage you to build those relationships and talk to them. The other thing, just while I'm on the subject, is that even if there isn't a clear path forward for home ownership, affordable housing organizations often, or if not always, have some sort of wraparound service that they provide. So building that credit history, kind of financial literacy, introduction to savings, all those things that are around that affordable housing community. So I would really encourage resettlement agencies to kind of bridge that gap and open that dialogue with them. Yeah, Evie.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. They're great, are great partner organizations to go in with on grants, to make their, if they don't have maybe the cultural or language capacity, they could be a great partner in a grant. DEI grants, there are lots of different grants that you could access that would make it more accessible for your clients. Just to echo what Josh said, I think the partnerships with fair housing orgs are underutilized right now, and we should be utilizing them a little bit more and bringing them into this conversation because there's so much overlap with who they're serving and our clients.
Okay, great. We've got about 10 more minutes and then we'll start wrapping it up. But I wanted to just kind of take a step back, and we've got a question as far as federal programs, HUD, and where they fit into this. But what housing subsidy, this is a kind of a broad question, but we can kind of unpack it. But which housing subsidies do refugees qualify for? It's a very broad question, but maybe we could just kind of speak broadly about what that landscape looks like.
I'll take that. There are federal housing programs. The thing is, they're either restricted or unrestricted. And restricted means that at least one person in the household must be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen to qualify for the program. And HUD's definition of a non-citizen is a person who's neither a U.S. citizen nor a national of the United States. So a non-citizen eligibility for federal housing programs, it does vary, Joshua, because it is based on the program they applied for, the laws and regulations that govern that program. And then restricted programs, they can have different documentation requirements, and the immigration composition of a household does not affect the qualifications. So example of restricted would be public housing. Of course, public housing programs, they are properties, they are owned by government authorities, but they're funded through HUD. And they're administered by a local public housing authority, and they are available for low-income families and individuals whose household income is less than 80% AMI. And then the Housing Choice Voucher Program is similar. It was formerly known as Section 8, so a lot of people get confused, but that is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It too is like public housing. It is funded through HUD. and is administered by a local housing authority and is available for low-income families and individuals whose household income is less than 80% AMI. In fact, the Housing Choice Voucher Program is one of the largest federally funded subsidy program HUD has. And then you have your project-based Section 8 housing, which is considered multifamily. It is a government-funded program that provides rental housing to low-income families in the privately owned sector. With this particular program, there is a HAP contract between HUD and the property management. I want to say something with the project-based Section 8 because a lot of people do get confused. With this particular program, the subsidy is attached to the unit, not to the individual like the Housing Choice Voucher, because a lot of times people get confused with those two programs. The Housing Choice Voucher, the subsidy is tied to the actual family or individual as long as they qualify for the program. In the project-based Section 8, the subsidy is attached to the unit. So if you have a client that leases up in a project-based unit, they have that subsidy as long as they're staying there. But the minute they leave, they don't have that subsidy anymore. So I just want to clarify that. And then we have the low-income housing tax credit, which is called LIHTC. That is unrestricted. So that is another form of affordable housing. So that's kind of a short overview of what is available.
Okay, great. Just to keep it moving forward, there's a lot of great questions in the chat, but looks like we're kind of coming up on the end. So I just want to ask, what are some ways that you've seen work? This is, again, the landlord question continues to come up. Maybe you can speak a little bit about to have landlords be flexible and really to kind of think of alternative ways to build those relationships, specifically with property managers. So, I think with the one-to-one, when you have like, the smaller rental opportunity, maybe you could speak a little bit more about kind of property managers and things that, just some language and some strategies around that, because it's coming up in the chat often.
Yeah, building relationships, and this is kind of where Lynette touched on the capacity. Really advocate within your organizations to have someone focused on housing. That is becoming more and more apparent. Even if it means, there may not be funding within your reception placement grant, but United Way often has housing grants. And I know of quite a few offices that have their housing coordinators or housing specialists paid out of a grant like that. But having someone focused that can work on relationship building, as Lynette said, them having a contact is really, really helpful, and someone that sometimes it means going and having coffee with them for an hour so that you can share stories on why this is important, et cetera, et cetera. And then once you have that relationship, talking through, what are some ways that would make this process both easier for the client, but also easier for them. I think we do have to remember, this is their business. This is for some landlords, this is their livelihood. So why is it making it worth their while? So saying, hey, this would be really easy if we had, it would make it easier for us to submit maintenance requests if we had it in several different languages, or if you had an option to submit it online, but you also had a paper option. I know there are some resources of multilingual maintenance request forms that actually have pictures of the entire room of each house, so that non-literate clients can circle the things that are wrong and bring it to the landlord to at least get that start of a question that they know what to come and look at in the house. So kind of ways to say, this will be helpful for you. It will be helpful for anybody that you're working with that maybe doesn't have the full grasp on the English language. And, the reality that we live in the United States of America, which is incredibly diverse, and you need to be able to rent to people that English isn't their first language, or you're going to miss out on a lot of people looking to rent. And so kind of giving them ideas of saying, and presenting it again as this would be great for us, but it'd also be really good for you, because you wouldn't waste your time going over to their house 3 times and not knowing what they need. And again, having that contact person to be able to kind of stand in the gap to help maybe with some of those communication issues, et cetera. And Josh, I feel like I'm missing a part of the question, so if you can repeat it.
No, that was great. I think I just because it was keeping to pop up, I just wanted to open it up for one last chance. And Lynette, I don't know if you wanted to add to that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I everything Evie said, and also if you don't have the manpower, the finances, it's very vital, because I notice a lot of resettlement agencies, they're not working with their coordinated entry system. They have resources and grants available for, we call it housing navigators. Once you become active with your continuum of care and COC, you're starting attending those meetings, they see your face, they see your needs, they can apply in your behalf to get housing navigators for your agency. And that's all how housing navigators do. They go out, they do the research, they recruit landlords, and they also do light touch case management. So that is an option to increase your manpower, is working with your COC to get your housing navigator.
Yeah, great point. That's an excellent point to make. Okay, so thanks so much to Evie and Lynette. That was excellent. We're going to wrap it there. I'd just like to say that we're going to end where we started with the learning objective, to have, we hope that you got from this at least one promising practice or useful resource related to short-term or long-term housing solutions for refugees and other newcomers. That we hope that was something you took away. Okay, so we have a quick 3 question survey for you to participate in. It's very helpful for us to have some feedback. So if there's a SurveyMonkey link there, I think we can drop in the chat. I don't know if that's necessary, but before we share our recommended resources, which is next slide, and that's the final slide, which hopefully everybody stays for that, we'd like you to ask us, we're asking you to help us with information on how this went, because we're going to be doing more of these webinars, and we'd love to know and get some feedback. Survey is extremely important to help improve future trainings and webinars. Our survey is only 3 questions long and will take less than 30 seconds to complete. So please take just 30 seconds now and complete the survey. And I'll give everyone just a little bit of time to do that. And then we'll end on the last slide, and I will explain next. And if you have any challenges, please feel free to put something in the chat. Okay, just while people are filling out the survey, I just want to say that in the chat, there were a couple of follow-ups on what that last part, the housing navigator, emergency rental programs. I will address something in the last slide that hopefully will answer those questions. So.
There's a couple questions about the survey, maybe going back to that page for everyone to be able, I think a couple people aren't seeing the link. If you
Oh,
use
okay,
your
great.
cell phone, it's a QR code. You can use your cell phone to access it. And I'm not sure if the link is showing up in the chat.
Okay. Could somebody, if possible, post the link in the chat real quick? Okay, we can go to the last slide. We can, and so there were a lot of great questions that we did not get to today, almost 47 questions. So that's excellent. It shows that we're definitely in the kind of right space, but we can go to the next slide. So here are some resources that we will provide in the follow-up email to this webinar. But one thing that I wanted to highlight is that we do offer technical assistance. So if you go to the Switchboard website and you sign up for a TA request, if you are an ORR funded resettlement agency anywhere in the nation, nationwide, you can go to Switchboard and request the TA session. And if you click in that TA session that you would like some housing assistance, that will go straight to us. So when we say us, it's myself and the team, and we will get back to you almost immediately. We get usually within 24 or 48 hours. So this isn't, it's free of charge. It's we are funded by ORR PRM partnership with IRC Switchboard, and we provide these services. So this is something we do all week. We'll be here forever to support you. But if you have a specific question that we didn't get to in the chat, or if you're struggling with supporting refugees during the resettlement process in regard to housing and you don't know kind of where to go, please reach out to us. We will follow up immediately and we will do our best. Number one, if we can support you, because we've been doing this and we kind of find that there are things that do work, then please reach out to us so we can support you. And if you come up with a question that we don't have an answer to, we can meet with you again. We can extend the TA sessions, or we can take it on us and go do some research and homework and come back to you with an answer. So please, that's an opportunity for all of you to speak directly to us and let us support you as you support refugees as they navigate the challenges around housing and accessing housing. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. Again, thanks to Lynette and Evie for all the great answers to your question, and stay connected to us. So we got Refugee Housing Solutions website, also, Church World Services, who we're part of. So there's a lot of great stuff there, switchboardta.org. And like I said, you can register through Switchboard for direct technical assistance. And if it's in housing, then it'll come to Refugee Housing Solutions and we can provide that support. So thanks everybody who's on the call. We really appreciated having your time. There will be more webinars that Refugee Housing Solutions and Switchboard are putting together in the future. So stay tuned for that. And it would be great to have all of you on those future webinars. So thanks a lot to everybody. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Okay, bye.